There we go. All right. Well, welcome to this session. Chances are, I think every one of you has been on another session at some point during the weekend. So if you haven't, there are just a handful of things. I'm sorry, I'm backing away so you don't hear the speaker from the other session going. In general, I'll have everyone's mic muted. So if you're looking to talk, you will have to unmute your mic in order for other people to hear you. Let me hit admit. There we go. Okay. And during the first part of the presentation, Jill's going to be talking about the topic, so everyone's mics will be muted. After that, I believe it'll be open for a question and answer. If you have a question in the middle of it, I highly suggest you use the chat function and post it like this. If you start with question marks, and you type it like that, that helps both of us see that it's a question in the chat instead of the standard chat stuff. So that stands out. It's a lot easier to go back and find that question and respond to it. Other than that, I'm going to hand it over and let her introduce herself and tell you about the session that she's going to be doing. So let me turn off my camera and mute my mic.
We were doing some kite festivals together and talking about video,
actually talking about what Nikki's doing now.
Yeah. We used to talk about that and doing tutorials on VHS. Doing tutorials on VHS. Then remember.
Hey, look, I told her yesterday she's doing a great job coming from an editor.
Thank you. Yeah, folks that know me well, Gibeon's one of my mentors, so he can attest to this, that I am, you give me an idea and a bag of gummy bears and I frickin' run with it. I just make it happen. So
she has no idea how thrilled I am that this is happening, but she'll know. She'll know.
So I'm trying to work out some technical issues on this end. We just had this working this week and it worked beautifully. So I'm making sure to close down all my other sessions. I think this is just a system thing. Looks like Gill is back.
Well, good.
Yeah.
That was a video presentation, right?
Yeah, and it's really beautiful. So while we get this all kind of sorted out, we'll just kind of have a little bit of a chat that so admittedly, I made a mistake and it led to this demonstration and this beautiful conversation that's going to happen. I was looking for people that wanted to maybe present workshops or do sessions like this during the We Fly Global Kite Conference. And we've never met in person. And I've only seen photos of the kites. And so I asked her, would you mind showing us how you paint your kites? I did not realize until I looked really, really close until she also pointed out, they're not painted, they're appliqued. So if you haven't had a chance to look either at her Facebook page or check them out on I think you can find a handful of selections of photos online, and I'm sure she's going to show it, is you have to look really, really close and detailed, and you see that it's a layering technique and plus dyeing and everything else that she does that gives it this painted look. I'm not fully aware of other folks that do it like this, and maybe we'll have a handful of other folks speak up, but to me, it's a beautiful technique. Is the link to the, oh yeah, let's see if I can make that happen. All right. So let's try this and see if we can present. I'm going to go through and make sure to mute everybody's mic just in case so we don't have feedback. So, sorry, Gibbers, I'm going to mute you.
It's okay.
There we go. All right, and let's try presenting now. I'm going to mute myself.
Hi everyone, welcome to my...
And that is playing in the wrong headset. So hold on 1 second.
It was working.
Oh, I find it funny that I got through this whole situation. Sorry about that, that I got through this whole weekend with only 2 hiccups, and here we are on day 2. So let's see if I go through a separate system, if this helps.
My presentation of My Kites Are Not Painted, a different approach to fabric dyeing and applique. Often when flying my kites, I get people, both the public and kite flyers, commenting what a great painting that is on the kite. Even Microsoft software thinks the kites are painted when recognising the images to add to this presentation. My favourite kite type, the Della Porta, also adds to the flying gallery effect, making the kites look even more like paintings in the sky. Whilst I take these comments as a compliment, I always have to point out that the kites are appliqued and dyed. There is no painting involved. In fact, I am not good at painting at all. Much as I admire people who paint their designs on kites, I prefer the intense colours produced by my process. I also like the way the colours change depending on the light conditions. This presentation is about who I am, how I got here, and the techniques I use to create these painted kites. Who am I? I'm Gill Bloom. I'm based in a small village just outside Colchester in the east of England. I've been making and flying kites and banners for over 40 years. I consider myself as a kite artisan, totally self-taught. I have no artistic background whatsoever. I also organise many kite festivals in the UK and am lucky enough to attend many international kite festivals around the world. So, my creative journey. I started making very simple patchwork back in the early 80s. As you can see by the photograph, the trendy curtains, you can definitely see what era that is. These were created on my mum's trusty Singer treadle sewing machine. This allowed me to learn how to use ripstop on a machine that worked slowly. I got very bored with doing patchwork, so I decided to do something else. So then applique appeared. By then I had an electric sewing machine that did zigzag. So this was one of my very first kites using applique. As you can see, it was very simple, but I was very pleased with it, as you can tell by the photograph. By then, I was very unhappy with the range of colours available to use to make applique, so I decided to try dyeing to provide the colours I wanted. As you can see on this Rikaku, the background is actually the dyed material. I also started using dye to create patterns on the material itself. So as you can see again on the frog Rikaku, the bark has been done with tie-dyed to give the sort of bark effect, and then I've shaded darker ripstop onto the top. I perfected that method a bit later on, so I didn't have to applique stuff onto dyed material. This set of slides will show some early examples of my kites. This first one was a large hexagonal kite made for the very first Weifang International Kite Festival in China back in 1984. I based the design on a motif from a Chinese box. It's actually peonies, which is obviously the Chinese national flower. The leaves were made just normal applique with a normal colour ripstop, but the peonies themselves were made with tie-dyed. It's interesting, I've never managed to get that deep colour again. Here are some more. The one on the left was made with 2 methods. The leaves and the stem were made with just simple applique, and then the veining and the shading was just added on top. And the blooms themselves were made from tie-dyed ripstop, which was then layered up. I think there's about 3 or 4 layers on that just to give the depth of the flower. The one on the right shows some different techniques. The sky and the moon are produced with batik. just melting candle wax and putting it onto the ripstop. And in the buildings, the vertical patterns on the building is reduced by resistance dyeing, by putting sellotape onto the ripstop and then dyeing it. This kite still flies. It still even has some of the wax in it. I think some possibility that the wax has actually helped to preserve the kite. This is one of my very early examples. A little bit of tie-dyeing. The blue sky has actually been tie-dyed and then put onto white ripstop. Everything else is just very basic applique and shading, and the veins are just done with stitching. To me, this looks very crude now, but I can see the genesis of my other kites in this kite. As you can see, nature and birds appear a lot in my kites. This one is done with a dyed background and mostly just appliqued material put on the top, although looking at it, there is the bark of the tree has been tie-dyed, and the breast of the bird has also been dip dyed to get the graduation on the red. So moving on a few years now, this kite was originally an Edo, but I've decided to turn it into a Della Porta because I got fed up sorting out the bridles every time I wanted to fly. It's the same idea, so you have a dyed background and the flowers are also dyed, and then shading and detailing has been put on either with extra ripstop or just machine stitching. On to the interesting bit, dyeing the ripstop. On the next slide I will go into some more details, but before that, some safety tips. Please, if you use a curry saucepan, make sure that it's not used to make your biryani afterwards. So all the utensils, wooden utensils and everything should be kept for dyeing only. Also wear rubber gloves. Onto the dyeing process. The dye I use is Dylon hot water multi-purpose dye, the sort that you can find in most haberdashery shops and craft shops. It comes in a range of colours and used to be presented in small metal tins, but these have been replaced by sachets. The small metal tins can still be found on eBay if you want some interesting discontinued colours. The sachets contain about 5 grams of dye, which is enough to dye about 5 meters of ripstop. Please note, this is only good for nylon ripstop. If you wish to dye polyester ripstop, then you need to use some other dye such as I-dye poly. For the actual process of dyeing, I use a large curry saucepan and a pair of wooden tongs and rubber gloves. There is no need to pre-wash the ripstop. Unlike natural fibres, there will be no shrinkage or colour loss. Make up the dye solution as per the instructions on the sachet. A couple of pints of hot water and a couple of teaspoons of salt. Add the ripstop and top up with more hot water. Then gently simmer the ripstop. It is important not to boil the dye solution, as the ripstop will definitely not like it. You can keep the ripstop in for as long as you like, but after about 15 minutes there will be no more colour uptake. Rinse the material under copious amounts of cold water. It is important to make sure that there is no more dye solution on the surface, because if you use dyed ripstop for a kite and your kite gets wet and there is some dye left on the sail, it will run. I know, I've done it. On here. No. Finishing. So I have found the best way of fixing the dye is to actually iron it when wet. Because the ripstop is wet, you can actually use quite hot iron. It's just a matter of trial and error. If you melt the ripstop, the iron's too hot. You can experiment with the other kinds of dyeing, batik, multi-dyeing, or even using coloured ripstop as a base for dyeing, etc. It's really just a case of experimenting. Of course, there are other methods of dyeing ripstop. I'm sure Ron Bohart has a very good method of dyeing ripstop, judging by the number of colours he can produce. So it's just a case of looking on the internet to find one that works for you. Of course, if you want to find more of my method, you can actually look on my website, www.skyblooms.co.uk, and there is a link to how I dye my material with a little bit more information on it. In order for you to understand my techniques, I've assembled a short video on how to do batiking and dyeing. Thank my husband John for acting as the cameraman. For those on the next slide. Welcome to 101 batiking with a candle. Right, this is an ordinary domestic candle. It happens to be red because it's cheap IKEA candles after Christmas. Step 1, light candle. Let the candle come up and start melting the wax. It's a couple of seconds. So, tilt the candle, as you can see, it's starting to melt. Oops, it's gone out. Tilt the candle, let it melt down onto the ripstop, and using your finger, I tap this, spread it out, and do whatever technique you want to do. Bigger blobs. Spots. Run it along carefully.
So like you ripstop.
So once the candle's melted a bit more, you've got quite a good angle, so you can then start doing long lines on it like this. Please note the wax isn't that hot, but if you think you might burn yourself, you can always wear a glove. So there you can see I've got the finished sail. There's various techniques on here. There's longs and dots and everything. In a minute I will dye it and you will see the various effects that the different wax techniques have. Right, so also I've just acquired this new tool. It's a proper batik tool. I think it's called something like a Jiang King. Basically there's a hot wax reserve in there and then a little tiny nozzle. So I will hopefully get finer control with this. I mean, this is basically done, you have a wax being melted on some sort of heating device and then you dip this in and then, so I will report back when I finish using this tool. So now you've got the wax actually onto the material. In order for the wax to have any chance of surviving a little bit in the hot water, you need to actually just gently bundle it up so it's not instantly attacked by the dye solution. So the way I do this is loosely bundle up. As you can see, the wax has gone inside. Loosely bundle it up and then just very loosely tie it around with some cotton. Like so. So you just end up with a very loosely bundled up piece of ripstop. Next process is dyeing. For dyeing, I don't normally do it next to the cooker. I have a separate area over on the right hand side, but it's smaller, so this is better to give you the general idea. Step 1. Previously boiled water. Step 2, putting the dye in. So, gloves on. My presentation, you can either use what I use, which is a big tin, which is quite expensive, or you can buy the sachets, right around, or the small tins if you can find them. There's basically these have got 5 grams in them. So if I'm using the big tin, 5 grams is approximately a teaspoon. Goes in like that, put the lid on, The advantage of using a big tin is if I want to, I can actually put more dye in and get a deeper colour. I now add the salt. It's ordinary British table salt, but I presume American or any other kind of salt will do. Add to the water. Give it a stir. And put your boil on. To start with, I'm just trying to heat it up a bit. This isn't a temperature, actually no, you can do temperature, so I will now tell you what temperature it is. It's 120 degrees I've got it on, centigrade. So as you can see, it's actually just starting to boil. So I add some hot water. It doesn't have to be boiled, it's just hot water from the tap. So obviously that stopped it boiling for a little while. I now turn down the temperature to about 80. Give it another stir. Get the ripstop. Add the ripstop. Push it down. Use 2 pieces of utensils to help. And obviously it wants to keep fights you because of air in it. And ripstop is quite impervious to water. But as you can see, it's just starting to take up the colour. Right, so the ripstop's been in for 2 or 3 minutes. So what you need to do is just agitate it to turn it over, like that. As you can see, a little bit just went on my work surface, but it's fine because this is glass and I also have glass splashbacks. But if you're using it on wood or stone, please protect your work surfaces because it will stain and you cannot get it off. Right, so we'll give it a little agitation. You can see the colour's starting to develop now. Just keep turning it over, based it to whatever colour you decide is how deep a colour you want. So as you can see, the colour is what I want it to be. Temperature's at 80 degrees centigrade. So now we have to empty the dye out and rinse. Of course, if you want to keep the dye for another attempt, it will not dye as deep as this, but you will get some colour out of it. It is possible to just leave the dye in the saucepan. It'll probably be okay for about a week, and I've also heard some people say that they actually put it in a glass jar with a sealed top and it'll keep for a little bit longer. Right, this is my proper dyeing sink. When the kitchen was designed, it was actually designed for me to be able to have my own sink so it doesn't stain the main sink. So here we are. You put the saucepan in the sink, add cold water, put it to one side, empty the dye out, and empty all the ripstop out, rinse around the bowl, make sure that all the dyes come out of the bowl because otherwise when you dye with a different colour, there's bits left, they'll show up on the next piece of dye. So there I am putting it on the side, as you can see it in the sink. Now this is a sink, ceramic sink, so I know that the dye doesn't actually stain it, but if you're using something like a composite sink, it can stain it. So I suggest that you maybe check before you put it down your best kitchen sink. Alright, so it's just a case of letting the main dye go. As you can see little bits of wax floating on there. Running the cold water, taking the string off, and rinse. A few minutes on, as you can see, it's almost there. There's not much dye left, but you need to make sure that there isn't any dye trapped in pockets. So it's just a case of working your way through. Giving it a massage, ripstop type massaging. And as you can see, it's actually now running clear. There's a tiny bit left, so I'll do another massage. I don't normally iron in the kitchen, but this is easier. Right, so we've got a normal domestic iron and an ironing board with a cover that's only used for ripstop dyeing. Right, as you can see, whether the operator of the camera can get in that close. It's on maximum. So, have you got the ripstop? Goes on wet onto the cover. This is going to sound weird, but there's a right and a wrong side of this ripstop. It irons better one side than the other, so make sure I've got it on the right side. And iron. As you can see, it's so wet that the ripstop can coat with it, and it just seems to get off. You see how because it's such a hot iron, it actually steams, so it gets rid of most of the creases. I will now quickly run through some examples using various techniques. This first slide is a set of banners made for the Leather Kite Festival. It represents a stormy sea. The bottom half of the banners is produced by batik application. To get the very dark colours, I've put quite a lot of wax on that. And then the top section has been done with tie dye. So basically just scrunching it up and tying it to get the effect. The next set is showing you resistance dyeing, this time using sellotape. This is a very simple method. It's basically just putting sellotape, or for the American Scotch tape, onto the ripstop before you dye it. Obviously, the ripstop and the sellotape part company fairly soon once they're in the dye, but it does stay on long enough to get the effect. This last one is a new technique for me. It's a Japanese dyeing technique called arashi, where the material is folded up really tightly around a PVC tube, like a drainage pipe, and then put into the dye. I think the effect is quite unusual, and this is my new style. I haven't made a kite of it yet, but it'd be interesting to see what develops from it. Where am I today? I've almost perfected the techniques I use, although still learning and discovering new techniques all the time. I start with the full-size sail, usually white, although it can be another colour if I want a different effect. I dip dye sections of the sail to provide, for example, sky and ground. And I add batik and tie dyeing to the sail. And I also possibly, if I want to say a bark tree or a piece of bark, will dye separate pieces of material using batik and tie dye effects. On this simple sail, I am using two different kinds of two dyes, the green and the blue. And it's merely a case of just leaving some sections of the sail in longer than others. For example, on the green, the bottom third has obviously been in a lot longer than the top section. And this is a resultant kite. As you can see, I've then batiked and tie dyed to get the bark effect. But you can still see just the original sail with the graduation of colours going through. This was a set of banners for Doha, so it had a sort of desert feel. This was produced with batik at the top to get the sort of reddish, sunny sort of sunset effect, and the rest were just graduated dyeing, although there are about 4 or 5 different colours of dye in this, and this is the final resultant set of banners. On this one, I used black dye to start with on white ripstop, and it was done with some batik techniques. And then I dyed the yellow on top of the grey area to get the sort of mixed colours, and this is the resultant kite. Finally, I do sometimes produce sails for other kite flyers. This was produced for Roger Stevens, and he did the design onto it. I think it's rather nice. I think he made a very good job. So after all that dyeing, batiking, etc., down to sewing. This is my basic sewing equipment. Doesn't really take much to make a kite. I have 2 pairs of scissors, both Fiskar. I know there's an awful debate on which scissors are best, but these I have used for many years, and as long as you have a good scissor sharpener and keep them sharp, I've always done well with them. The soldering iron has a pyrography tip, so it's very fine, and all else you need is a pencil and my trusty Singer 20U industrial sewing machine. Has given me sterling service for 30 years plus. Now we're on to the building process. Perhaps the best way of describing this is if I follow through on a single kite, describing the various steps as I go along. This is going to be the tigress kite. I start with a basic white sail, which was then folded and crushed and tied to dye with a green. And then one side of the green sail was dipped into brown ripstop to get the brown effect on the left-hand side. Here you can see me adding some detail to the background sail. Here I can use my technique of making tree bark. Basically the tree shape was cut out in white ripstop, and then the ripstop was tightly folded and tied to create the vertical lines of the bark. It was then dyed in a brown ripstop. At the same time, I used the brown dye to dye some white material to produce the soil level at the bottom of the kite. Further along with the design, as you can see, the tree trunk has been sewn on and cut out from the back. On the right hand side, I have some grasses. I basically cut them out with white ripstop, and these were dyed and then tacked on and sewn on into position. The white ripstop tiger was roughly shaped, cut out and placed loosely onto the kite sail, ready for me to decide what I'm going to do next. Further along, now as you can see, I've joined the grass on the right hand side with some grass on the left hand side, done in the same way. So cut out in white, then dyed, tacked on, sewn on, and the back cut out. I've also added some leaves at the top of the tree, also done in the same way. So these ones, the whole section of leaves was cut out, and then each individual leaf was tied to give an effect to the veining, and then it was all dyed as a single piece of ripstop. Again, sewn on and the back cut out. Here you can see me starting on the tiger. For the legs and other pieces, I dyed some material to give a beigey colour, because that's almost impossible to find as a normal colour of ripstop. I then put the beige material on the leg and also the orange material on the leg, then cut the white from behind, so thus you've only got one layer of beige or orange. And then I've added black and some more beige to get the fur and the camouflage markings, the black camouflage markings on the fabric. These are all sewn on and cut away from the back. Some of the fur doesn't need to be cut away, it's just laid onto the beige and left just to give it a sort of more depth of colour. As you can see, I'm continually adding more details. Quite clear on the right hand side is that I've put the orange onto the white and then cut the white away. As you'll see on the next side, when I show you the back, you can see the difference between leaving the white and taking the white away. This shows you what happens when you cut the white away. All you have left is the seams where the material itself has been overlaid on itself. But also that means that there's no white left once everything's cut away from the back. Some of the detail on this hasn't actually been cut away. If I look at it, you can see that most of the grass and the leaves have not yet been cut away. Now on to the interesting bit, trying to get the face correct. I had to have a couple of goes at this because the first one just didn't look correct. It's the same idea. So you've got the basic background, the beiges and the oranges already sewn on, and then you're cutting out black strips and other shading elements and sewing them on, or hot tacking and then sewing them on. Here you can see some of the close-up of my workings. This is all very crudely done, and a lot of the sort of shading and the black and everything, once it's sewn on, is then cut back with a pair of scissors to get fine detail and neaten everything up. As you can see, a lot of the sort of fur technique is done by actually fringing the ripstop and then sewing the ripstop off. Just notice on here there's lots of pieces of cotton, but I never cut the cotton off till the end. As I go along, I'm always sort of looking and thinking, that doesn't look quite right. And things get changed a lot as we go along. For example, here you can see I've added the white chin to the tiger, and also moved the eyes and the ears. Eyes are important. If you don't get the eyes right, the thing never looks right. Here is a backlit photo of the sail, and it shows you more details of the stitching. You can see where I've used the stitching to highlight the fur effect of the cat. Again, you can see that sometimes in various areas I've added more material back onto it to give it a darker shade. Here you can see the finished sail. It's backlit to check if anything not cut away that should be. Just needs the edges taped, pockets added, frame and bridling. And of course, all those thousands of pieces of cotton cut off. And of course, what I haven't mentioned in the past, that every different colour of ripstop has the appropriate colour of thread. So for example, the tree leaves will be green, the tiger will be orange, black, white. So there's a lot of cotton to cut off. Here's a photograph of the back of the kite, showing the technique quite clearly. And as you can see, most of the white ripstop has now disappeared. It's only left in very small numbers of seams. And here is the kite flying in all its glory. Sometimes I do things differently. For example, here I've taken a single piece of white ripstop, applied my various techniques, and then dyed it in one piece. I then look at the finished dyed up piece of ripstop and think, that edge of that ripstop would look nice as an edge of a petal. So I've actually cut the petals out from the ripstop, depending on where the different shades are, and then I've sewn it onto the sail in the normal way. I can then add directly onto it various leaves, or in this case stamens, or anything else can just be sewn onto it. One thing I thought I ought to mention as well, this isn't a variation, it's the way I do it. Everything I do is on the floor. So no tables or glass tables are involved in making any of these kites. So what is different from the normal applique process? There's better colour choices and effects through dyeing the material. No black lines between the colours. The thickness of the seams has been minimised to reduce fabric weight. It uses less material, less wastage, as multiple full-size layers are not used, as in the typical applique method. No computer programs are used to blow up or reproduce images. I only use straight stitch, not zigzag. Of course, there are many ways of doing applique, and as you can see on my journey through making kites, I've tried quite a few of them. So go out there and explore your own methods. Thank you for your attention. If you've got any questions, I will now switch over to the live feed and we can do a Q&A. Look forward to hearing your questions. Bye.
Yes, absolute applause. That was beautiful.
Fabulous. Fabulous.
Now, yes. Can they hear me?
Yep.
Yes, of course you can.
Before you get started, I just have to say I have to jump off real quick and start another session, but hopefully you can see there was a whole bunch of questions posted in the chat. And so, yeah, awesome job. I'm glad we got the audio working, and I will be back shortly. So, yeah.
Right, let me have a look at all the questions I've got to answer.
Iodized salt.
Iodized salt doesn't make any difference. What type of fabric is it? It's nylon ripstop, but it can be any kind of nylon ripstop. It doesn't have to be a particular brand or anything, just normal ripstop. My dye only works for nylon ripstop. You have to use what Ron uses for his kites. I dye poly for polyester ripstop, otherwise any ripstop will do. The yarn on the non-coated side, it's actually both coated. It's just this particular brand of ripstop's got more coating on one side than the other, but it's coated on both sides.
Can you use lining material?
No, it'll fray.
You can
if you don't mind hemming it all the way around. Do you iron the wax? What happens to the wax? Basically, the wax dissolves in the dye with the hot water and the dye. It just dissolves into the dye, so it comes away from the sail, so it isn't actually left on the sail. The ironing sets the dye. No, not really. The hot water, the actual dye is in the hot water actually does it. The ironing is just trying to make sure it doesn't crease too much. If you want to dye the resistant part of a different colour, spelt wrong, how do you get the wax off? How do you get the wax off, or is that even possible? The wax has already come off because it comes off into the dye. So yes, you could actually put more dye again onto it and then dye it. So yes, you could do that. Tacking, I use a soldering iron, so it's hot tacking, so it's just like spot welding with a very fine tip of a soldering iron. Some people like Ron use the spray stuff. I mean, that would work as well. So there's all different methods of actually attaching. Some people use stop tape. I've seen all sorts of methods used, but basically anything that just holds it down flat. On the grass, did you dye the cutout part? Yes. So basically I cut the grass out to the shape I wanted to on white and then dyed it. So yes, on that. How do you hold the fiddly bits? That's basically the same idea with hot tacking, so everything's hot tacked. Con artist, why do you have to cut away? Why can't you just sew on layered pieces? You could, but I find if you leave the white, it actually reduces the light coming through, so the colours aren't as bright, but also it makes it heavier. So if you've got another complete sheet behind, it would be a lot heavier. And actually, yes, a see-through fabric, if you could find one, yes, it would work. But again, you've got the weight problem, so that's why I cut things away. Where does the cotton come in? Sorry, I call it cotton, but I imagine you mean it's actually the sewing thread I'm talking about. Polyester sewing thread. So the tiger, which is behind me somewhere, I can't see myself. 2 to 3 weeks. Are the edges hot cut? No, they're done with scissors. So nothing's hot cut. The material is not hot cut. It's just done with scissors. Have I got a close up of a fringe anywhere? I can show you on the kite. Come up. Mine is light.
Tech support moves the mic.
Or even the video.
Even the video camera. No, go that way. No, that's right. What am I looking at?
Do you want to look at the fringing on it?
Here. It's not very good, this, so apologies immediately. Because you can't see Jill on her own camera. So. Do you see all down the beards of the tiger? just very finely cut away. No, stop talking.
Right. So what I tend to do with that is I'll make the fringe slightly wider than I want, and then cut it in closer to the stitching to get a finer point on it. I think that's all the questions on there.
Any more
questions? Any more questions? Oh, isn't it? So you start by applying the dyed bits to a sheet of white, and in the end, all that white is cut and tossed. No, it's not tossed because I reuse it to make. I use it to make the pattern. So, like when I've done the tiger, if I want to make a shoulder in orange, I will then use a piece of white ripstop onto the white ripstop, cut round where I want, and use that piece of white ripstop as a template for the orange. So the bits that I cut out, I reuse as templates. And all the beard frays, they're all sewn down, yeah. So every bit is sewn down. Tedious process, yes.
It's worth the effort.
Yeah. So any more questions? You can't actually hear me, I don't think.
Yeah. Anybody want to say anything?
Can I make a commentary?
Yes.
Hello, Jill. Hello, John.
Hi.
Good day to you guys. For the group, we've been together at many. First of all, thanks for the incredible presentation. We've been together at many festivals, international ones, and I've, of course, I've seen the kites in the sky. It's remarkable with all the detail. I got to say this to the group, how well these kites show even at altitude, with that much detail on them. It's remarkable, the work. I've seen the kites, of course, so many times, but I never realized, really, I thought that we're fully painted, that you actually painted with a brush, because I never looked close enough to see exactly what you're doing. And I'm just absolutely stunned and fascinated. After all this time of having looked at your kites, I finally see what you do and how you do it. And it's just incredibly fascinating. And in the sky, they look incredible at whatever altitude. I've seen these pieces quite high in the sky, and I can still see the images beautifully. So a testament to great work, great craftsmanship, great artistry. From one to another, I can only tell you how much I appreciate this work. It's really, truly fantastic.
Thank you, Ron. But I also appreciate your work, because your work's fantastic as well.
Well, thank you. That's humbling. But
I mean, I wish some of your graphics are amazing.
Well, it's
the shapes as well.
And the techniques, like you were talking a little bit about, hot tacking versus this versus that. Yesterday, we saw so much material, so many different things from so many different people, closing with Bazar yesterday and applique on a more commercial purpose where you have to make money with it and so forth, so people got to see different aspects. So what I come away from all of this, in telling people is there's no easy rewards. There's no easy way. This takes time. Different techniques work for different things. If you're working with paint, some of the sprays may not work. You may have to tape or hot tack. You have to find your way to work with materials and be consistent. The end result that we're seeing from your work, that we see from other people, is from persistence of using a method and just literally milking it for all it's worth, and just stay consistent with everything that you do. And yes, that's the secret to achieving this wonderful work that we're looking at.
Yes, but you're always learning as well. Like, for example, on this one, just bring her over. I couldn't do, I don't know if you can see, because I can't see myself. Yeah, I can't see myself. The tail bit, like this bit, I just couldn't, it's just too fine for me to do that. I just couldn't do it. So what I decided in the end, I don't know whether you can see the detail on this, I actually just got a piece of black ripstop and the soldering iron, and actually very carefully just soldered, holding the black, and then sewed that on just so that I could get the effect. Because you think, how am I going to do that? I just cannot do it. Even I have my limits. I can't sew that small. So yeah, it's just a way of always looking for the different ideas. And as you said, I've picked up a lot of ideas from people just listening to people. Yes, it's fascinating how people have different ways of looking at things.
Every time I go to a kite retreat or a workshop or what's happened here over the weekend, I'm always learning something. I'm stunned at all the availability of techniques and things that people are using out there. But what's more fascinating for me is the journey. It's not so much the destination. You just described something on how you achieve those feathers. For me, that would be the fun part. How to achieve that.
Yes. Because it makes it challenging. Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. Sewing, forget about it. That's the least favorite part of my work. Sewing.
Oh, yeah, I love sewing. You can tell I love sewing. No, that's I prefer the boring bit is actually putting it all together before you sew it. I like sewing as I'm sewing it. I mean, very often I'll be changing what I'm doing or adding bits on. So to me, that's the creative process, the actual sewing. So it's almost like a canvas. Like if you were painting with an oil, you might think, I'll put a little bit more on there. And so I'm actually, as I'm sewing, I'm thinking about what I can add.
So if you get to scrape it off and start again.
Yeah, you can scrape it off and start again.
Never seen that before.
Absolutely fantastic. Just absolutely fantastic. To get a chance to have a more in-depth look at the work, you know, and it's incredible. And you can see it by the response on the chat. I think we're all fascinated with it.
Yes. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for listening. So, is there any more questions?
There was several. There was many.
Several. No more questions.
Yeah, Jill, I had a question. Yeah. On the detail around the bark, it looked like when I was looking up close at it that you did almost like a quilting stitch over the top. Is that true, or did you just do a lot of back and forth lines?
It's a lot of back and forth lines. No, I just use straight stitch. No quilting or any other zigzag.
So you didn't use a free. So did you release your presser foot and then just move around like you would quilting?
No.
Okay, it looks really beautiful in that detail. It looked like you might have done something like that. That's cool.
Yeah, the poor old sewing machine goes backwards and forwards a few times, but obviously I've got industrial, so you can lift the foot and move the material, so that helps a bit. Yeah.
The knee release is great.
Yeah,
cool.
Yeah.
It was wonderful to be able to see this. This is fantastic.
Thank you.
Maybe you'll see it in real life one day.
Yeah.
Any more questions?
No. Okay.
Right then, I'll wind it up if there's no more questions then.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
Okay.
I don't use zigzag. It's all straight stitch. It's all straight stitch.
You know, there's some controversy over whether straight stitch leads to pieces ripping out. Yeah. Have you ever had, you make fair size kites, nothing's ever ripped out?
No. I think it's almost, what happens, somebody goes to a workshop, I know 20 years ago, and somebody's used zigzag and spray paint and spray adhesive, and it just cascades down. Everybody sort of follows the same, so you get this urban myth that you must use zigzag. I mean, I've got kites that are, well, the one that was on the presentation, the Cityscape one, that's nearly 40 years old, and that's just done with straight stitch, and that's still fine. So, yeah. In fact, I think sometimes the zigzag can cause more problems, because you're actually putting a lot more holes in the sail than you are with a straight stitch. Think about it.
I think the zigzag's got its place if you want to emphasize a line. You know, you want to make a bigger statement with a black thread or colored thread, then it's a design element. But not sure that it really is a construction element.
I don't care. I won't be able to lay down, none of that.
Ronnie, mute.
So somebody's just asked, do you ever dye a sewn sail? I'm thinking, yeah, I have.
The cargo we got from.
Yeah, I have occasionally done it. Yes, Yeah, I have thought of doing it that way around sometimes, but no, normally I do it the other way. But yes.
But the question, the sail itself is the sail size. So if
Yeah.
you're making a rikaku this way, you do the complete rikaku.
Yeah, yeah. Any more questions?
Speak now.
Speak now, or I will
Or go to
disappear.
our presentation. Okay, thank you. All right, bye everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Incredible.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank
Bye.
you.
All right.
Thank you.